are now listening to the IELTS podcast. Learn from tutors and ex-examiners who are masters of IELTS preparation. Your host, Ben Worthington.
Hello there, IELTS students. In this tutorial, Robert and myself are going to be talking about grammar for the speaking. We're going to look at the passive voice. We're going to look at using gerunds, and we're going to give you a very useful technique to help you pick up points, especially for the use of advanced grammar. And that is basically starting your sentences with what and why. But before we jump in, let me just tell you who I am and what we do at IELTS Podcast. My name is Ben Worthington, and I've been teaching IELTS for a long time. I left the UK more than 20 years ago, and I was teaching English, and then I quickly specialized into IELTS because I like getting results for our students, and this gave birth to IELTS Podcast, where I interview the experts, and then if it works, I'll test it with my students. If it works, I'll put it in the online course, Jump to Band 7, or it's free. Been getting some fantastic results there, and soon we'll be interviewing some more students and releasing more podcasts of their success stories. And if it doesn't work, we just throw it out. So have a look at the online courses at IELTSPodcast.com. We've got the Jump to Band 7, or it's free, and the Speaking Confidence course, where you'll find a lot of the material that we cover in these podcasts is also included in the Speaking Confidence course, but in more detail and a little bit more practical, and with some exercises as well. So let's get started with today's tutorial. We've got Robert, an ex-IELTS examiner. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm pretty well, thank you. And you, Ben? How's everything? Good?
Doing good, thanks. Doing good.
Great.
Winter has come. It's chilly, but I'm not complaining. It's nice to have those changes, I think.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
What doesn't kill me makes me stronger.
That's very well said. I agree with that.
I just slipped in one of our advanced phrases, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so do you want to kick off with what we're going to start with today, Robert?
Yeah, okay. I think it was last time, remember we were talking about those complex structures, the conditionals, if I had the chance, I would spend all my money in a day, and the modal verbs, the mays and coulds and stuff like that. And of course, I think we also mentioned how important it is to get your basic grammar very solid. The verb tenses, the past and the present, and future forms, and when to use the continuous forms, I think we're using, and I think it's a good example. I'd like to carry on with that today. I don't know how you feel about, that topic of the environment. It's a tricky topic. There's so much vocabulary that we looked at a couple of sessions ago, and let's continue with that, thinking of other possible complex grammar we could use in part 3, and of course in part 2 and part 1 of the speaking test. Passive voice. If I say passive voice, most people are going to say, oh no, how boring. It is pretty boring, isn't it? Because we associate it with very formal English. Describing processes. We're told that it's used in scientific writing, academic kind of writing. I tell you what it's all about. It's that idea of making what you say and what you write sound totally impartial. I almost said inhuman there. I know this from, I don't know if you got that at school as well, when we did kind of like laboratory reports on physics and chemistry. It had to be written in the passive voice, think like, and it had to be in the past tense. An example might be something like, a study was carried out on the effects of climate change on seasonal weather patterns in 3 small islands in the Pacific. It was found that, what happens to the human beings? What it means, of course, is that, those processes are kind of like, universal. If I'm doing it in London, I could do it in Lusaka. If I'm doing it in Manchester, I could do the same experiment in Mumbai.
Right.
So it can be replicated, as they say. But how do we use it possibly when we're talking about processes in the speaking test, because it doesn't come in naturally, I don't think, to spoken English too much. But it's a good idea, I think, to drop one or two if possible. For example, I mean, imagine that, and I think this is a part 2 topic, which would move into a part 3 discussion. You're asked to talk about a law on the environment, either one that exists in your country or one that you would like to see, come into law. Notice I said also, you are asked. Oh, got it. So I had a good breakfast this morning. That's the passive voice, isn't it? So, I mean, it could be a good opportunity. I mean, listen to this. I thought of this one. I'm talking about a law, and I'm saying to the examiner, well, yeah, there was a law that was passed by our parliament here a couple of years ago, and it limits the number of trees that can be cut down, to be used in the timber industry. And I think this is a very positive law, a very good law, because so much ecological harm has been caused in my country by deforestation. Now, okay, I'm forcing it. I used, I think, 4 or maybe 5 passive voices there. Listen to them again. A law that was passed, instead of saying they passed a law, or the government passed a law, or parliament passed a law. And then I said, it limits the number of trees that can be cut down to be used. Oh my God. In the timber in the timber industry, instead of saying something more natural, perhaps in normal in colloquial English, it limits the number of trees you can cut down. Yes. The general they, the mysterious you and the they that make our lives miserable, and like that, So yeah, and then I said, in my opinion, this is a great law. It's a fantastic law because it's so positive, because so much ecological harm has been caused by deforestation. That is a more natural use of it, I think, because I'm not saying deforestation is caused. I'm more interested in the effects. Right. Because remember, the passive voices, I'm thinking, it's rushing out from the building to get your car, and you find that they, in other words, the traffic police, have taken it away because you were parking in the wrong place. So what are you going to say? Oh my God, my car is gone. My car has been taken. It's the car that worries me. I might say some terrible things about the police as well, but I better not say that at the moment.
Right. So just to help out the audience, so a more natural, clear way of speaking is the active voice, is subject, verb, object.
Exactly.
And what we're saying here is we're changing the order. And in normal spoken English, it's not so common, but Robert just illustrated very accurately, like in some cases, it is actually very useful in the phrase with the example of the police, and in the phrase with the environment. And it's usually like when we can't really tell, or that's not, but the main actor isn't sort of like the main purpose or the main point that we want to communicate. So much ecological harm has been caused in my country by deforestation. In this example, the main emphasis is the ecological harm. We don't really want to talk about who has been doing it or who is responsible. We want to emphasize the ecological example. So I think that's a great point there.
Yeah, because it's sometimes so obvious, it's like saying, oh, they got that criminal, he's been arrested. He has been arrested. We don't say the police have arrested it, because that's obviously the job of the police to do that kind of thing. We're interested in the criminal. Oh, they caught him. He has been caught. Great, good news.
And as an examiner, Robert, when you hear this, Are you ticking boxes and like, okay, passive?
Mentally
points
ticking
for that?
boxes.
Right.
Mentally ticking boxes. I mean, it's a tricky thing, the examiner's job, isn't it? Because you know, you've got the whole of language, they're divided up into little segments, but language is not like that. It's a continuous flow. It's, what's the favorite word these days? It's holistic, but you are actually training yourself to pick out those little details, as well as listening to the person at the same time, you know.
Gotcha. Okay. Is there anything else you want to mention about the passive before we move on to gerunds?
No, not at all. Really. I'd like to go on to that gerund stuff, because, you know, that's another area of English which is tricky, because often it doesn't feel well in people's native languages, does it? Because we've got, you know, sometimes we use the gerund, sometimes we use the infinitive of the verb. I mean, I would really honestly strongly recommend anybody to take the time to study the gerund and its many uses. Get hold of some good grammar stuff. I don't care where you get it. There's a lot of stuff around that. I'm not recommending anything in particular. We all have our favorites, but spend some time, you know, going through it, looking at examples, comparing it, see the uses of it. It's pretty vital, I think, to get your grammar really effectively at a much more advanced level by using the gerund properly, using it correctly.
Yeah, totally. And it goes back to what we said before on previous podcasts, like a solid understanding of the tenses and the basic grammar rules before you can attempt the passive and you know. And the more advanced features we talk about, or the conditional or the modals or whatever, just a solid understanding of the basics will go a long way. And then with that solid foundation, you can start working on the more advanced techniques.
Yep. And of course, I mean, with the gerunds, sometimes it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, you know, we can get very familiar with those common verbs in the language, which are either followed by a gerund or an infinitive, or some of them, of course, which can be followed by either the gerund or the infinitive. And it often depends on the meaning. I mean, I remember years ago that one of my first bosses, when I was still teaching in the UK, he said, well, because I was confused about, you know, all those verbs that we use. Do I say I like going to the beach, or I like to go to the beach? Because I've heard both, particularly in American English, who often use the infinitive. And my boss at that time was a good guy. He said to me, look, Rob, it's like this. I mean, if we're talking in very general terms, we would say the gerund. I like going to the beach. But if I want to give a particular example, for example, I like to go to the beach, particularly at the weekend with friends from work, because we have a great time doing whatever we do on the beach, playing volleyball or something. Now I said, oh, I see. I get the feeling of the difference there. And when you look at it, it probably is true in practice that we tend to use the infinitive for particular examples and the gerund for generalizations when it comes to those type of verbs. You know, I like, I love, I don't like, I hate, etc. But another one I was thinking of, for example, if we've got a verb which is always followed by a gerund.
Hold on, Rob. Sorry, just before we move on to the next one, I just want to emphasize that for the students. I may seem like I'm a parrot in this episode, but I do think there's a lot of nuggets of information, valuable, useful information. And you've heard me say a million times, repetition is the mother of all learning. So I'll just repeat it. So if we are talking in general terms, I like to go to the beach. Sorry, if we're talking in general terms, I like going to the beach, then the gerund is appropriate. If we're talking about a particular case, I like to go to the beach, then the infinitive is more suitable.
That's right.
Okay, so carry on now. Sorry.
Oh, don't worry. So, I mean, let's take a couple of examples. I tried to think of a couple of examples using gerunds or maybe the infinitive as well, talking of our topic about, you know, pollution and contamination, climate change, and the environment in general. For example, if I said something like this, well, In fact, the Greens in Parliament suggested prohibiting logging altogether. Logging, remember, is cutting down trees. So I mean, I've got two gerunds there in a sense after my verb suggested. The first one, of course, is there because after suggested, I've got two choices. I could always say something a bit more complicated. They suggested that we should prohibit. Oh my God, too many words. Let's make it one word, just the gerund. Suggested prohibiting. I suggested going to the beach, but nobody wanted to go to the beach. And then, or what about a verb like remember? Yes, because, older people remember going to the local beaches and swimming in the sea. But now the water is so polluted, they don't allow people to swim anymore in the sea. So we allow something to happen, infinitive, but we remember something. But wait a minute, remember is a tricky one, isn't it? Because if I'm thinking of my memories, I'm going to use a gerund. Let's imagine you and I, Ben, that we went to the same primary school together and we meet up again after many years and we're talking about old times. Hey, Ben, do you remember playing football outside in the park every day after school? Yeah, it was great, wasn't it? Yeah. Wow. And oh no, and what about that game we played against that other school and we lost? Oh God. Do you remember losing that game? God, I think we were almost crying, weren't we? It was terrible. So, but of course, don't talk about losing. But of course, remember memories with a gerund. But remember when we mean please don't forget, we use the infinitive. Hey, oh, by the way, please remember to send me that email tomorrow, okay? Oh yeah, sure, I won't forget. Remember to do something. We're kind of reminding somebody to do something. So now, or of course, in the near future. Huh?
Right. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, I must remember to go to the supermarket this afternoon, or something like that. So, the other thing I wanted to mention briefly with the idea of the gerund, of course, is we use gerunds always after a preposition. I mean, prepositions are other tricky areas. So I think there's some good stuff all over the place in grammar books about this idea of let's say an adjective, a preposition, and then a gerund. I mean, for example, interested in. Example, there are many volunteer groups interested in making our beaches clean or safe for swimming again. Yeah. So interested in doing something. Huh? Of course, we could go on for hours and hours about this because I mean, all we can say in the end, I think, get to your grammar book, study it, look at it, practice it, get it right, because the prepositions after a gerund is another. The gerund after a preposition rather is another area I think examiners are going to be listening out for, because those are the key points sometimes. Those were areas where we know as teachers, as examiners, that students will have problems. And if you think, oh my God, this person's good, they've solved that, they've got that right, that's good, that's positive, that's at least a 7, if not an 8.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I guess if the examiner's based in one country and the examiner's been living there for a while, they're probably on the lookout for the common mistakes of that language, of the English speakers from that specific language. So I guess it would be worthwhile finding out the common errors that your native language group might make, making special effort on those so you can stand out amongst your peers more.
That's correct. Yes, absolutely.
Super. Okay, just one last thing before we go on to the next part about gerunds. Because it's such a humongous area, I mean, humongous, slight exaggeration, but it is a large area, the gerunds, as you just heard. And I would recommend breaking it down into small pieces, mastering each piece. And there's lots of ways of doing it, either translations, either online quizzes, either books, finding out the theory. But just break it down into smaller pieces and it becomes incredibly more manageable. Now, we're going to move on to the next part of the podcast, which I think is incredibly practical and incredibly easy. So do you want to start off with this one for us, please, Rob?
Okay, you mean the idea of the yes. Yes, it's one more thing I think, and it's the way, particularly in spoken English, we often introduce a sentence or what we have to say, the subject of a sentence after saying something like what or why or how, a phrase beginning with these words. I mean, let's go back to something I think I said it in another podcast a while ago when we were talking about greenhouse gases. Remember I said something like, well, believe it or not, in fact, it's the United States that has managed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions the most. Now, it is the United States that has managed. That's a classic traditional English sentence, isn't it? We've got the subject, it's the United States, and then we've got the next part, the clause that begins with that has managed. And I'm saying, well, believe it or not, but what if we say something like this, which sounds better, I think? Well, what is most surprising, perhaps, is that it's the United States. And then I just get into that same sentence again. I don't change any word of that sentence. But how often do we actually begin saying something with a phrase like that? What's most interesting is that what's most surprising is that what's really surprising is that what I find really interesting is that we can collect a whole little set of possibilities there with a few changes, but it's always what is it interesting, surprising, shocking, or even disgusting? We could think of all kinds of interpretations that we want to put onto it.
And I think it's relatively quite straightforward.
It is.
And also, this is one of those more advanced structures that you'll be on the lookout for. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem is, that a lot of grammar and a lot of stuff what we learn as grammar is not what I would call grammar for speaking, if you like. I mean, there's a grammar we use for writing, that's fair enough, and the grammar we use for speaking, and the grammar we use for speaking doesn't get enough attention, I think. And those little things are key to natural speech, or to sounding natural. Think of it in anybody out there who's tried to learn another language, and you find that in any language under the sun, those expressions are the keys to getting into conversation and showing your interest, creating even the kind of drama, if you like, when we say things like, well, what I find interesting is, and so your people are paying attention to you. Yeah, what is it?
So true. This is so true. It's the grammar that is taught is usually in the books, and it's usually grammar for writing, and the advanced grammar for speaking is never really covered until today, until now.
So we got things like what is most, what is surprising, what is most surprising. Maybe I don't know, somewhere we should publish on IELTS podcast, like a list of these possible phrases. I don't know, it could be fun.
Absolutely. Let's do a future podcast. Let's do one for next week about these exact phrases. I think that's a great idea. But it's not just limited to what. We can also use the other question words. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Why is that so? No, actually, I used it wrong there. I used it as a question, as a direct question, which is incorrect. But if you do answer it yourself, then I think that's fine. Why is that so? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And things like how this happens, I have no idea. How we can practice these phrases is, that's interesting, isn't it? What I know is it would be a good idea to learn a lot of these phrases. Yeah?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then that brings me to the final phrase of what doesn't hurt you makes you stronger, or what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, which is what we started off at the beginning. So we're coming to an end of today's podcast. Thank you very much for listening. And remember, if you are struggling with IELTS, then please get in contact. We can help you. We're helping lots of students every single week. We help them improve their grade. We give them feedback on their speaking. And remember, we've got the online course, Jump to Band 7, or it's free, and also the Speaking Confidence course. And we're getting fantastic results with that. So good luck with your IELTS exam, and take care.
Thanks for listening to IELTSPodcast.com.